observations from Paul Hudrick as he joins us for Inside the Sixers here on a Monday. Young scores 35. Embiid has 39, so both stars went off. So what was the difference in the game? Let's bring Paul Hudrick in, our Sixers insider from 97.3 ESPN.com. Not exactly how we thought they would draw that up there, Paul. What stood out to you as why the Sixers are down 1-0 when Joel Embiid scores 39? And look, if I said Embiid scores 39, Harris has 20, Simmons has 17, Curry has 29, he hits 5 threes, you win that game, right? So what happened?
A bunch of things. And I think it's funny that sometimes we all kind of want to narrow it down to one thing, whereas that's never really the case, right? That's not, you lose games for many reasons. The start was a perfect storm of bad things. It was Trae Young doing Trae Young stuff that he's very good at. I didn't love the Danny Green matchup. I disliked even more the coverage of just having Joel Embiid drop back and play drop coverage for every pick and roll. Didn't love that. And then you turn the ball over 9 times in one quarter in the playoffs. And then for some reason, Doc Rivers decides to go to that all bench unit in the second quarter. They might have still had that comeback. Well, just took so much out of them. Like maybe they could have completed it if it was, 12 at halftime as opposed to 20. So yeah, I think that bench run where they got outscored by 14 points by the Hawks bench, that killed them. So I think it was just a perfect storm of Trae Young being very good. Quite frankly, Doc Rivers not having his best game as Sixers head coach. And then the turnovers in the first quarter, which to me, that was a symbol of, and Ben Simmons addressed this after the game, they weren't ready. The Hawks punched them in the mouth, and they weren't ready.
All right, so they hit 23s. And if I was to say they're going to hit 23s again, they're going to win this series, right?
Not necessarily. I mean, they're good. This is why, it's so, I've had a lot of people ask me, oh, well, they were able to do this and that against Bradley Beal. Why can't they do it against Trae Young? Aside from the obvious fact that they're just two very different players, both incredibly talented, both, two of the best offensive players in the NBA, this ain't the Wizards. They got really good players, the Hawks. Bogdanovich is a really good player. Gallinari off the bench. John Collins has turned himself into a really good three-point shooter. You go up and down that roster. Lou Williams is a guy who's playing a small role, but still very effective.
And no Hunter yesterday
is underrated to me. I love Kevin Huerter. I think he's a really good player. So, I mean, they are a good team. It's not just Trae Young. So, yes, it's Trae Young. He's the one who he gets it going. He's the catalyst. He sets everyone up. But they can shoot. They are a good team. So, Mike, here's the thing. I think you could have weathered that Trae Young storm. You could have weathered that three-point storm if you handle things on your end better. If you don't turn the ball over 9 times, if you change the coverages a little bit earlier and change the matchups against Trae Young a little earlier, and if you didn't go all bench and have your bench get blitzed, I think you could have overcome the 23s and overcome the hot start by Trae Young if you had done those other things better.
I agree with you there. The problem, they score 128. This is Doc Rivers said, we want to be the best defensive team. You are predicated on being a good defensive team. Look, the Knicks aren't a great scoring team, but the most points they gave up in that series is 113. You can't give up 128 and think you're going to win a game. So I guess when I say if you're going to make 23s again, that's probably another game where they're scoring 120, 125, 128 points. That can't happen. So to get 23s means you're getting a ton of great looks. That's one problem. They were getting open looks all day long. And the Sixers, all right, so Young early's beating them, so they double him. He's finding guys open all over the place. So if you're going to get open looks, you might see another game where they score 20. But my question, they hit 23s, which is, give them credit, they had so many open looks. But if they only make 17 threes, they don't win the game.
Right. No, the margin when you consider that's what I'm saying. When you consider everything, how that game started, they gave up 42 points in the first quarter and almost came back and won. Well, that should never.
It's part of the reason, Paul, that two things. Okay, they have started this starting lineup together every time they are available. Do they have to seriously consider making a change? Which, look, you're in the second round of the playoffs. It's random. We've seen teams do this where, somebody starts all year long and then, you know what, we're going to start Andre Iguodala for this game. Is that something the Sixers might have to consider, is starting Thibault over Green?
I'm not there right now. I'm not there in game 2, especially with the way they came back and the success they had in the second half, I'm not there for game 2. Now, if they lose game 2, which if I'm being honest, I don't think will happen. If they lose game 2, then it starts to get a little bit of desperation mode. Then maybe you got to change things up. But I think by simply changing I think you can have Danny Green defend Trae Young, but if you're going to do that, you have to, the coverage can't stay the same. You have to trap, you have to double, you have to blitz, you have to show him different things. You have to get the ball out of his hands. Like that's the bottom line. You can't just let him have the ball. You're going to get some open looks. That's going to happen because you're doing those things, but make anyone else beat you. Like if Bogdanovich scores 40 points against you, you tip your cap. If Trae Young scores 40 points against you, shame on you. That's your fault. You didn't do anything to get the ball out of his hands. And I thought that's what they did late in the game. Like they got the ball, they trapped, they blitzed, they did different things. They gave him different looks. They didn't let them set up their pick and roll so close to the 3-point line. They forced them to, do things further away from the basket. And that's when they started to have success. So I think, and that was with Danny Green guarding him a lot of the time. So I think there is a path to them having success with Danny Green guarding him at times. But you have to change your coverage. With that said, he needs to see plenty of Ben Simmons, and he needs to see plenty of Matisse Thybulle. You need to switch it up. You need all three of those guys to give him different looks at different times, and you need to change. Like, it was funny, Mike, because coming into the series, Doc said to us, he was asked, what do you do about Trae Young? Well, you show him different matchups. You show him different coverages. For the entire first half, Trae Young saw the same matchup and saw the same coverage, and he scorched them. And it's like, you just literally told us you need to do this, and you did the opposite. And in the second half, that's when they made the adjustments, and that's when things started to get better. So I do think there are. You should be encouraged by the way they closed, and encouraged by the fact that there are you're never going to stop him because he's just so good, but there are ways to contain him and slow him down, and not just let him go nuts.
Paul Hudrick inside the Sixers. They lose yesterday, 128-124. One of the things I think they were kind of saying they don't want to use Ben Simmons because Young is so good at drawing fouls that you don't want to pick up a couple cheapy fouls early in the game and be in that scenario again. So there's another catch-22 is, all right, we got to use Ben Simmons, but we don't want him to get 2 fouls early in the game because he's chasing around Trae Young. So that's another tough way to kind of balance this thing.
And that's what happened in the second half, right? Doc started the second half with Simmons on Trae Young. Ben picks up 2 fouls. The second one, Trae Young baited him. He drew it. He hooked Ben Simmons' arm. The ref called it in favor of Trae Young. And listen, it was strategic for Doc Rivers and Ben Simmons after the game to both say, maybe we could have, like Doc complaining about that call that wasn't overturned, which I thought it was cheap, but it's probably still a foul, whatever. And Ben Simmons saying him feeling like the officials aren't letting him be 6'10" and aren't letting him be physical. And if they allow him to do that in game 2, things will be different. And I'm sure teams do stuff like this all the time. I am sure that the Sixers submitted some tape of Trae Young doing some things, I don't know if you saw the one thing going around of Trae Young flopping because Joel Embiid bumped him on a free throw, boxing him out.
Yeah.
It's my goodness, this guy's he's a great, I don't take anything away from him. He is a great player, one of the best offensive players in this league. But man, he does do a lot of grifting and a lot of flopping. And it's part of the strategy. It's part of what goes into having to slow him down. So I'm sure the league is going to look into that. I'm sure the Sixers want the league to look into that. And we'll see how the game's officiated in game 2.
Well, you just said he's one of the best offensive players, but he's not a good defensive player. But that didn't really come into play, I thought, on Sunday. They couldn't get matchups where he was defending the ball.
Yeah, they probably could do something more, I feel like, with maybe his man screening for somebody, whether it's him, his man screening for Tobias, try to get him one-on-one against Tobias or even Ben Simmons, whatever. They're going to hide him probably mostly on Danny Green because Danny Green is an off-ball offensive player. He's not a guy who's going to take anybody off the dribble. He's not going to take Trae Young into the weight room and post him up. So they're going to try to hide him as best they can on Danny Green for as long as possible. What I would like to see perhaps is you maybe in lineups where, Danny Green's off the floor and, going back to the all bench lineup, which I don't agree with at all. Maybe mix in George Hill with this other starters, and then you have more of a threat. So you can go run some pick and roll with whoever, George Hill and Ben Simmons. Get Trae Young caught up in some screens. You can't hide him as much in a scenario like that. Or maybe they put Trae Young on Seth Curry, and Seth Curry can take advantage of that matchup. I think there are ways to exploit him on defense. I don't think the Sixers did a very good job of doing that. So yeah, I would like to see them do more of that, certainly. And I think that's the biggest thing is using whoever is guarding him, becoming a screener and trying to get him mismatches that way.
Yeah, that's because Young is not a good defensive player. They could try to find ways to go after him, but that's a big difference in this series to the last series. Is Ben Simmons routinely had a smaller guy on him that he was able to back in. Tobias Harris constantly had mismatches where Neto's on him. You're not getting that situation here because Ish Smith, Neto, Russell Westbrook, you don't have three guards or three guys that are 6'3" and under on the floor that the Sixers really, their size took advantage of. And look, Atlanta's got these wings. They just 6'6", 6'7", 6'8", 6'9". They're just rolling guys out there.
DeAndre Hunter didn't even play.
Yeah, and he's one of their better shooters, by the way. So there's some size that you were able to get a lot of points on in round one. And I thought their offense looked very like, oh, whoa, what's going on here? What's all with all this size and length in early in that game?
Yeah, Earl, I think part of it too, Mike, and this isn't to make an excuse. This is NBA basketball. They needed to come out and they needed to play with their hair on fire, and they did not. I think it's the Hawks had a tougher. You talked about it. The Hawks had a tougher test in the first round. The Knicks are what they are. They probably clearly the Hawks are a better team. They took care of them. But the Knicks gave the Hawks a much greater challenge than the Wizards gave the Sixers. And I think the Hawks were kind of already because even when you look back to that Sixers-Wizards series, it felt like the regular season, right? Like it didn't feel like that playoff intensity, at least to me, because they were just so much better than the Wizards. I mean, they didn't have Joel Embiid and they still blew out the Wizards in Game 5. Like they were such a better team that it didn't have that intensity, didn't have that feel. The Hawks went through that. They had to go to Madison Square Garden and steal games. So like they were already in that. And I don't think and I think that's why they kind of punched the Sixers in the mouth, and the Sixers weren't ready for it, quite frankly. And to your point about, that's part of it, is that this Hawks team is just flat out better. They're better in almost every way than the Wizards. And I think defensively is the biggest thing, and their size. And I think it did. I think all of that was a factor in the Sixers and those 9 turnovers. Like, think about it. Like, if they just turn the ball over like once or twice, they are still in that game, even with Trae Young playing well. So I do think it was a matter of them not being ready for the moment, not making an excuse. They needed to be, but I imagine in Game 2 they are going to come out with a very much renewed focus. They are in this fight now. They've seen the Hawks have already stolen home court advantage, so they are now in this thing.
Unbelievable. Now, someone texted in and said, Sixers 24 of 35 from the line, 10 of 29 from 3, and I'm sure it'll get better. But conversely, Hawks 20 of 21. Well, there's a big difference. 20 of 21 from the line, and we know the Sixers missed 9 free throws, 7 by Ben Simmons. You lose the game by 4. This is a game where someone will say, look, he's missing these free throws, can't have it happen. They tried to hack a Ben, although I thought it kind of worked against them with the lead. But Ben Simmons can't miss 7 free throws. Look, we want him to get to the line more. He got there 10 times. You can't miss 7.
No, 100%. I mean, if he goes 6 of 10, you can live with that. 3 of 10, you can't live with. I mean, quite frankly, you can't. Like, even Doc's whole point per possession thing, that ain't a point per possession. Nope. So it's not good enough. It's not gonna get done. I thought it's a shame because I thought it ruined an otherwise pretty solid game by him. After the first quarter, he turned the ball over a couple of times. I thought he looked pretty good throughout the rest of that game. But yeah, I mean, just there's no other way to say it. Like, he needs to be better. He needs to hit more of them. He's gonna go to the line more. If it comes to a situation where it's the inverse and the Sixers have a slim lead, you better believe the Hawks are going to start fouling him. And you don't want to get into that situation. He needs to step to the line. He needs to hit him. I don't know. It's mental. Like, it's 100% mental. He's a 60% career free throw shooter. So you can't go 3 of 10. I mean, there's just no other way to put it. He has to hit him.
All right. So right now, Game 2, Tuesday night, what's the first adjustment that has to be made at the start of that game?
Just more aggressive on Trae Young, showing him, you can't have Joel Embiid dropping all the way back into the paint on the pick and roll. You need to get him further out. Like, you can't let him get, like, I know a lot of people were upset, and I even tweeted it, but maybe my tweet was in a little misguided about Ben Simmons picking him up, 40 feet away from the basket and fouling him. Well, the reason Ben Simmons is doing that is because he wants that screen to be set all the way back there. And then that gives the rest of the team more time to help and more time to rotate, and it gives Trae Young less time. And he's got to cover more ground that way. So, and the Sixers have to cover less ground in essence. So I think that's the big thing I want to see is in general is just picking him up further away from the basket. I know that that's going to maybe lead to him getting some drives and some things like that, but I think that's kind of one of those things. Like there's no great options against this guy. He's a great player. So I just think, I think the best bet is to try to get the ball out of his hands as much as possible and try to make anybody else beat you. And they might, because they have a good team and those other guys might beat you. But I would rather go down trying to get the ball out of Trae Young's hand and having, the Bogdanoviches and the John Collins kill me, as opposed to just watching, banging my head up against the wall, doing the same thing against Trae Young for 40 minutes a night. So that's what I want to see. I want to see just in different coverage. I want to see like one, occasionally you blitz him on a pick and roll. Occasionally you drop. You know what I mean? I think you got to mix up the coverage. I think you got to mix up the defenders. I think those are the two big things when you're talking about Young. And I don't want to see any more all bench lineups. Those are the two biggest things I want to see.
Somebody texted in that said, all this talk about Young, one player, what happens if you get past this round and you got to face one of these teams that do have multiple weapons? Because Trae Young right now, he's got you on the yo-yo, but he doesn't really have that second guy. I mean, Bogdanovich is pretty good, but, I mean, he's probably right below an all-star level player. That's a good point. Is one guy right now took you to task, and if you're trying to figure out how to defend one, what are you going to do if you have to defend multiple? You might have got an eye-opening experience yesterday about where you sit and some of these other teams are. Now, Harden not going to play tonight, so that should be interesting to see what happens in that series and if he's able to get back into that thing, because the Bucks had the same similar look, was like they just didn't have enough. They even with two guys out there, they couldn't figure out what to do.
Yeah, and I'll say a couple things. I know a lot of people were talking about like, oh, the Nets hit a lot of shots, which they did, and I don't know that they're gonna that the supporting cast is gonna hit that many shots. But at the same time, I did think that Brooklyn was flat out the better team.
Better, yeah.
But listen, losing Harden hurts. That's to me. If I'm being really honest, I think he is, of those three guys offensively, he is the best one. Durant is the best scorer. Kyrie might be the best like one-on-one ball handler, ISO type player, but James Harden is the guy who he can shoot. He can take a guy one-on-one. He can play in a pick and roll. He can facilitate. So I think them missing Harden is a big deal. I do think it's a similar situation with the Hawks and the Bucks. The Bucks hadn't played in like a week and a half or something. I can't it feels like forever ago that they swept Miami. So I mean, I think that's certainly a factor going on the road. They probably weren't quite ready for that environment. So yeah, I'm very intrigued to see how the Bucks come out in game 2 to see what adjustments they kind of make. But if you're Milwaukee, you're still okay, right? I mean, you lost game 1 in Brooklyn. You have a chance to steal game 2. If you steal game 2, you take home court advantage. You feel pretty good about yourself. So yeah, I mean, that series still has a long way to go. And, as we've seen throughout the playoffs, these things can change from game to game. So I'm very intrigued to see what kind of adjustments the Bucks make tonight and how the Nets will look, without James Harden the whole game. And if that's a prolonged absence, how they'll look going forward.
All right, NBA playoffs tonight. By the way, Bucks and Nets. We have that game tonight at 7 o'clock here on 97.3 ESPN. Tomorrow we have Sixers and the Hawks. Thursday we'll have Bucks Nets, and Friday we'll have Sixers Hawks. So you can listen to all the Eastern Conference playoff games here on 97.3 ESPN. Check out Paul's observations from Game 1. They're over at 97.3ESPN.com. And make sure you get the free mobile app as they are blasted out on a message after each Sixers game. There he is, at Paul Hudrick on Twitter. Game 2, Tuesday night. All right, man, we will talk to you.
Sounds good, Mike. Thanks, man.
He, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk on the hotline.